Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an online nutrition and health coach. Today's guest is Jeff Black. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
My man, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Today, I think it's going to be a great conversation. I feel it in my bones.
For sure, Jeff. It's going to be great. I appreciate you coming on, man. I'm excited to chop it up with you. The first question I like to ask all my guests, and I'm going to ask you here, Jeff, is who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Oh, easy. Without a doubt, Lee Priest, cover 1997 Muscle Fitness. He's got his arms up. You just see a full display of just perfection to me. He was the first bodybuilder I saw when I got into bodybuilding. I'm like, damn, I want to really look like that. Like I could look like that because he was shorter like me and so forth. Dorian Yates, for his work ethic, just put, hard training on the map. And then I really like Jay Cutler, just the people's champ. He really took, I think, the 90s, him and Ronnie, and really made the 2000s a great era of just a rivalry that was amazing. I think it's the best rivalry in all bodybuilding. I don't think it really, you have your Franco, your Arnolds, but everyone knew how that would go. But with Jay and Ronnie, it was like Jay closed that door and he pushed it the last few years. So it was cool to see. But those are pretty much my three favorite ones that I've had all throughout my years. I do like Nick Walker for one of the up and coming guys. Like, I just like who he is. I like what he stands for, and I like his work ethic a lot. He just reminds me of, I don't know, just kind of what you read about in the 90s and 2000s magazines. Just get in there, train, do your job, and leave.
Love it. Okay, so let us know, Jeff, at what age you started lifting weights, and then why did you start lifting weights at that specific age?
Oh, man. So, like, mine's, like, tied into my story. So I started working out with weights when I was, like, I think they gave them to me around 9, 10, 11, somewhere in that age range. I was in physical therapy, rehabbing from a horrific skateboard accident I had. I was born with brittle bone disease known as osteogenesis perfecta. When I was 8, I decided it was a great idea to get on a skateboard and go down my hill in my neighborhood. It just didn't end very well for me. Actually, I went and took pictures for the first time in over 30 years of myself on that hill. The two different hills. It was just hard for me for a long time to go back to. But when I really got into bodybuilding, it was when I got bullied my freshman year in high school. Towards the end of it, the guy called me cripple for one last time because I walked with a subtle limp. And, when you're in high school, I was like 95 pounds my freshman year. I'm skinny. I'm getting bullied. I've been homeschooled for a few years. So I'm trying to figure out how to deal with kids and everything. And I don't know what came over me, man. Like, I just jumped up and like hit him in the face. And then I got suspended, and my mom wasn't too upset because I stood up for myself. Well, she took me through, she had to go stop at Kroger's. And I was like, okay. So I walked through the magazine aisle and I stop, and there's a cover of Flex magazine. And I just remember being like, oh my God, if I could look like that. Whoa, like in my mind just blew. And after that, it was Muscle Media, Muscle Mag, Flex, Muscle Fitness. Every month I was going to, the first of every month, going to the Kroger, getting all that stuff. And it was probably, I would say, when I found bodybuilding when I was 15.
Okay, cool. All right. Now I want to kind of get a little bit more into your backstory. So you kind of touched on lightly a couple things there. You mentioned the bone disease that you were born with, the skateboarding, homeschooled. So I want to talk a little bit. So tell us, first of all, where you grew up. And then I want you to talk about a little bit about maybe, if the reason why your parents chose to homeschool you. How long were you homeschooled? And what was that experience like for you personally?
Let's see. I was born in Joplin, Missouri, so Tornado Alley. It's kind of moved, though, since I've lived here in Nashville for a little bit. It seems like we're getting it. But I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Moved there in the summer of 1986. I resided there until 2002 when I took a job with the Department of Homeland Security. In response to 9/11, I actually got hired. And I spent the first 2 years traveling, meeting government deadlines for the Aviation Transportation Security Act of 2001, signed it by Congress. So I was a part of about 600 to 900 individuals that were just sent throughout the U.S. Like we were talking before we started going live. Well, because you're from Idaho, I was like, oh yeah, I spent time there. I was like, all there is to do is drink Miller Lite and drive 4-wheelers in the snow. So it was kind of like what I experienced in Iowa. You try not to laugh so hard, but it's okay. I'll laugh for you on that. But my parents to go to like the homeschooling side, it was strictly out of my surgeries. So when I had that skateboard accident, I was going down a hill, and when I let my car go down it, when I was saying I went to it a few weeks ago for my birthday, it was my first time in 33 years, 34 years, I stood on that hill. Like I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I just remember as a kid, anytime my friends would go, I would just loop the other way in the neighborhood and around. My car hit 27 miles an hour. At the point I would have fallen off the skateboard, jumped. I ended up going about another 50 feet. Like it was just a violent impact, but it shattered my femur in multiple places. Like it was the equivalent, he said, of taking a dish rag and just twisting it. And my femur did that. So my knees on the right side of the pavement, my ankles completely on the left side of the pavement. And the injury, the accident was so violent that they later found out, I think it was like 2 years later, that I had blown out the disc in my back. So I'm missing the disc between L4 and L5 still to this day. I was told not to squat or anything. I didn't pay attention. So, but nonetheless, the reason they homeschooled me is because I was in full body cast. So trying to recover that, having to learn to walk again. And then what happened was after the first surgery, my leg was 2.5 inches longer. So they're like, oh, whoa. Well, since he was born with bow legs, because when I was born breached, and the doctor used forceps to pull me out. So when he did, he collapsed my femurs because nobody knew in 1980 that osteogenesis perfecta was a big thing and only affects 25,000 people in the US. It's extremely rare. So he broke my femurs, and whenever my parents would change me, you lift the baby by their legs, I would scream bloody murder. Like nobody would touch me for like weeks on end because I would just scream. They found out later I was diagnosed with this bone disease. So my legs were bowed. So they're like, okay, well, his leg's 2.5 inches longer. We'll just break the left leg and rot it. So they did, but then that second surgery knocked me into like early puberty. So as I started recovering, the right leg kept growing. So it was an inch later, and this doctor was like, oh, no, we're going to do a bone structure machine. So if you've ever seen the halo devices they put on people's necks or their heads, I had that on my left tibia and fibula for 12 weeks, and they used 27 spokes to go through my leg. So I had 27 holes. They looked like little bullet holes. And it was made to support the bone, and it kept my leg perpetually broken for 12 weeks straight. They ended up breaking my leg doing a radical turn in the office. Like it's a very traumatizing thing I've been writing about in my book, but they tried to put me back into school at these different times. And like, I couldn't walk through school correctly. I needed help. Schools weren't just equipped like they are today to help kids with disabilities and so forth. So my parents were like, hey, we'll just homeschool them. And it was hard when I went to school with my bone structure machine because my mom wanted a break, and I was like, I could go to school. So I wheeled myself in, and these spokes that were going through my legs would just ooze blood. They would ooze yellow. Like I would end up having to like take a scalpel and like cut the skin off every third day, like just to kind of just keep it from. It was a wild thing I went through, but that's why I was homeschooled in that regard. So I went through quite a bit of extensive surgeries for over a 6-year period. And then I said I was going to walk into high school my freshman year, and I'm doing that. So I was proud to even just walk in that freshman year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now that's a lot of, I'll just call it life experience at a very young age. Right. And probably some people might not ever even going into adulthood recover from that in terms of maybe like some of the mental side of things. What have you kind of maybe mentally gone through or had to work through to kind of build yourself up to be a confident, productive individual, if that kind of makes sense, Jeff?
Oh, well, man, so after I came out of that surgery, they had prepared me to start, like I was executing well in physical therapy and walking in the pool and stuff. My very first step in physical therapy, my leg broke again. So I had to go back into another surgery. So I kind of got, life hit me hard at 11, like, wow, this really sucks. You know what I mean? So what I went through, because I'm very honest, I've been writing a book about this because everybody was like, man, it's a crazy story how you have a brittle bone disease and you end up being like not a bad bodybuilder actually. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's been cool. Without bodybuilding, I wouldn't have the life I have. So I owe bodybuilding everything. But I would, in my 20s, anything that pushed on me, I just didn't want to deal with. Like I would just check out. I just didn't care. It wasn't until eventually I kind of like, in the 1990s, no one talked about mental health. No one at all. Like no, no one at one time ever was like, "Hey, are you in pain?" Like my mom did me a great thing by not letting me have pain pills. Like I swear on my life, people think that's archaic, but I'm like, no, 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 no. After seeing what has developed in our culture today with pain medicine, I mean, it's nothing that they were doing. I was very depressed. I tried to take my own life in 2012, swallowed a bunch of pills, just opened up my sunroof, hung out by the lake dam, and was just chilled. And then I woke up throwing up. So I don't know why that happened, but it did. And then I remember the next day I kind of got up and went about my business. And someone was like, this older couple who really loved me, was like, "Hey, we think you had like a mental breakdown. Like what went, like you just showed up and went right back to work the next day." And I'm like, "Yeah, I just need to blow some steam off." And that's like literally like I couldn't get the voices to shut off. So I ended up going through a lot of therapy. I ended up stumbling into using psychedelics. I know they're kind of a hot, sticky topic in today's world, but I got into microdosing LSD, mushrooms, and doing various macro trips. And, coming from a person who I, I felt real guilty for doing it because I was raised very conservative Roman Catholic family, just certain ways. And to be told that this extremely dangerous drug could potentially do something that, because, growing up as a kid, you hear all the stories. Oh, if you take too much, you turn into the orange juice man. He was the guy who, thought he was a glass of orange juice. And if you touch him, he spilled everywhere. And I just remember like, oh, I was just so at my wits' end because I couldn't feel anything. I legitimately went through so much that I just shut off feeling. Like I learned to be like, okay, well, pain is progress. So in my personal life, I had to be in pain to have progress. And damn, when you're running a business, as you know, you're always in pain about something, like, whether it be a tax bill, whether it be a complaint, whether it be trying to figure out how to afford this new equipment as a gym owner, all these different things. Um, Psychedelics gave me an answer. And I would tell anybody who's at their wits' end and who's gone through pharmacology like I did with Paxil, Wellbutrin, Lamictal, all the different ones they put me on because you're bipolar this, you're depressed that, you're anxious here. Psychedelics saved me. And I know I caught heat for a long time, and now it's starting to come more into the modern world and the discussion because mental health is a crisis point, especially among men. But that's really what did it for me, man. Life kind of hit me hard. And I think because of what I went through as a kid, like I've learned in business, like you just have to show up every day. Like there's going to be days you fail, there's going to be days you win, but most part, you just have to still show up. And I think that has a culmination of everything, man. I just got very lucky that I went through those experiences so young that life just was easy to me as an adult.
So I guess, Jeff, to kind of wrap up that kind of discussion for the individuals that's maybe going through some rough patches in their life right now, like, maybe not necessarily going straight to like the psychedelics and stuff like that, but maybe
Right.
before they would move in that direction, if they chose to go in that direction, like what can you kind of like say to them to maybe help them or encourage them maybe from your own life experiences?
To encourage them to potentially consider psychedelics, or the path I would tell them to start walking down for help with their mental health?
Just whatever direction you want to take it, whatever you feel like you need to say to somebody out there right now that's watching or listening to this.
You know, it's tough because we always want to feel guilt and we want to feel shame for just being the thoughts we have, right? Like I think a lot of people can just, you get to your wits end and you just think it's really dark and you just want the voices to shut off or whatever's talking you, whatever's bugging you. If medicine has not worked for you and you've really tried to do a good exercise program, eat good food, like, because really that matters, like, taking care of yourself in a lot of areas matter. Like I tell everybody, you can't eat bad food, drink, and take antidepressants and expect to feel better. Like it's just not going to happen. But a lot of people think that. So I say it's a matter of when you come down to the decision of if you're ready to meet your maker on the other side is probably the time that you should consider looking at psychedelics. Because if you're ready to have, in my opinion, a mystical experience of death, then why wouldn't you be willing to have the mystical experience of rebirth, which is what they offer?
All right. bodybuilding. Now, first of all, before we get into bodybuilding, Jeff, like when you were in high school, I know that you went through a lot, right?
Right.
But did you have thoughts of kind of like what you wanted to be or what you wanted to do post high school while you were kind of like, in those teenage high school years? If so, what were you thinking about at that age? And then once you graduated high school, how did life kind of take you in that direction or maybe in a different direction?
Man, once I found bodybuilding, I was completely consumed with it. I was really hoping to be the next James Hetfield of Metallica. I love playing the guitar. I've been playing since I was 9, so I just love shredding on solos. I thought that that's what I wanted to do. But damn, man, once I found bodybuilding, I was like, I think my senior like superlatives, it said my goal was to be the most ripped bodybuilder ever. And it was just hilarious to me, like, because I was just so bought in. So all through high school, I played Dungeons and Dragons. I was a bodybuilder, a big nerd and stuff like that. But I got into UT Knoxville with in pre-med, but I didn't do good with it. I just didn't like it. I just always was attracted to the gym. And I got this job with the government, and I got lucky. I managed to kind of move through it. And then one day I was sitting down with the federal security director, dude, and he was like, it's former lieutenant colonel, and he's like, why are you doing this? It's like, you have a real gift. You should go do that. And I'd already been part-time training, and dude, I just never looked back. So I can say right from high school on, I knew I would do something with health and fitness, even though everybody told me it was a terrible decision. You'll make no money. Bodybuilders make no money. And I'm like, well, maybe I didn't make any money bodybuilding, but my approach to health and fitness and what I've done has helped make a lifestyle for me, which I'm proud of. So,
Okay, so that government job, let's touch on that. First of all, where were you when September 11th happened? Did you have any type of emotional response to it? Did it really mean anything to you? I think I was like in 8th grade. I didn't even know what the World Trade Centers were. We watched it on TV. That was the gist of it. Obviously now, as an adult, there's some different meaning to it for me personally. But at that time, I was literally a kid, didn't know what was going on. But for you, where were you? Did you have some sort of emotional response? Did it mean anything to you? And then talk about your experience in that government job. Was there anything that you kind of took away, maybe outside of like, I don't really want to do this the rest of my life? Did you learn any lessons from that specific job?
That's a really good question. I might ask you to remind me after I tell my story, but I think well, actually, I just moved back from Oregon. I decided to go to a local community college to just basically get some credits. And I was thinking about doing criminal justice, oddly enough, because I was like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. And like I said, I always wanted to do the gym, but everybody was like, don't do the gym. It makes no money. And I'm like, okay, fine. And this is 99, 2000, 2001. So still like trainers were clipboard holders, at a gym. There wasn't what it is today. And I try to tell people that. I'm like, no, dude, it's like nowhere near what it is today. But I remember I was sitting down, I was having my eggs and egg whites in a bowl of Lucky Charms, get ready for my first class. And my mom was watching Good Morning America because she had a big crush on Charlie Gibson. And they bring in like at 8:57, they're like, hey, we're about to leave, but a plane just hit the World Trade Center. We don't know if it was a mistake. So they're filming it live, and I watched the second plane hit. And you just remember being like, that's the most fucked up thing I've ever seen. And most people forget, like, the live coverage is pretty brutal. You were hearing like these smacks, and they're like, what is that? They're like, the body's falling from the towers. It was like, holy fuck. And I think I was like most people who was, 19, 20-year-old rowdy boy. I was angry. Like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? And my dad actually was former military back in the day, and then held government contracting jobs and stuff like that. He's like, hey, they're going to create this. He's like, I think with you in criminal justice, they're hiring so many, they're not going to need a 4-year degree. You should at least go apply. And I did. And I managed to make it through all their psych tests and all that. And I spent the first 2 years, like I said, traveling. And then I home based back in Nashville. It was 2.5 hours away from home, bigger city. The woman I was with, who's my son's mom, my oldest son's mom, we decided to come here. And I could say this: what the government taught me was how not to lead people, and also not how to manage people. Like, so I had a very good intimate relationship with like how to treat people piss poorly to get piss poor results. And like, I always had the best teams because I would take care of my people. When I first got in, I'm like, what do y'all need from me? They're like, longer smoke breaks, longer lunch breaks, because they were doing curbside. So this is back when you had to screen the luggage by hands, dude. So you had these women, 40, 50 years old, slinging 50, 60, 70 pound bags. and they retired, and it's Tennessee Heat. So I learned how to take care of people. So I will tell everybody I will never ever forego those 5 years because it taught me everything that how to not run a company. And all I've done is just like for parenting, I've done everything opposite than my parents. And everyone's like, oh, you're a great parent. I'm like, oh, it wasn't hard. And then in business, I've just led completely different than all my superiors did in Homeland Security. And I've done really well in business. It was funny. I got a review, my final review, my boss, I'll never forget him, Coop. He was like, he smacked the table. It's like, why won't you just go along? And I'm like, because it's not right. Like I'm not just going to go along with what's cast down. So sorry if it's stupid, I'm not following it. Like there's that whole thing of there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, that's really a lie. There is such thing as stupid questions. So that was one more like a stupid statement, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, man. Okay. So Jeff, bodybuilding, what do you feel like kind of in the beginning when you were a teenager and you kind of saw that magazine and things like that? What outside of just like, seeing a jack dude, and that's, especially people, you're a little bit older than me, but when we were growing up, it was Arnold on the big screen, right? We had
Right.
the Rocky movies, like the people, the men that we saw in movies and like the action figures, they were jacked. It's just, it was a different society, it was a different culture back then. So outside of kind of that, what really pulled you into bodybuilding to the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to diet, I'm going to stand on stage in posing trunks and flex my muscles? Because there's a big difference between seeing Arnold on the big screen saying, I like that, and I'm going to work out, to actually becoming a competitive bodybuilder. So what pulled you into competitive bodybuilding? And then start talking about your competitive bodybuilding experiences, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, I've always, ever since I remember once I hit that kid, I went back to school. Like I was talking to my mom and about needing to eat more, and she was taking me to the gym and stuff. So she made me like 2 tuna sandwiches a day, like, with like low fat mayonnaise so I could eat them on my breaks. And then I had lunch. She made me chicken and rice, and she taught me how to cook. So I would just eventually do my own stuff. So from pretty much 95, 96, I was 96, all the way through August or May of 2006. I loved it. I trained, I ate. I didn't really go through all the like bulking and cutting. I just really was a guy who loved eating and training like a bodybuilder. And then I got my job, personal training. I've been doing it a year, and a couple of the guys at the gym were doing it. And I was like, you know what, man? I think I'm ready. Like it took me 10 years before I ever felt confident to do it. And because of my surgeries on my legs, my left leg smaller than my right leg, my legs weren't as big as they are today. Like I've really had to work hard to grow them. I knew it was an uphill challenge, but I was like, I'm just gonna go see like what's the worst case that can happen. So I did a horrible diet, man. Like it was the typical, chicken, green beans, 4 meals, like just terrible bro stuff back in the early 2000s, and just total, micronutrient starvation, everything else you can think of. I got on stage. I weighed in at 165, and the weight class went to 185 in novice, but I ended up getting like fifth out of 16. And I remember being like, all right. So the next week I showed up and I did Tennessee, Mr. Tennessee in 2006. And I got fifth in the open, lightweight open. And that was like out of like 10 or 11, I think. And, it at that moment, I was like, man, I actually think I could kind of do this. Like people see my scars, but I'm able to get lean enough at the time. There were just things I at that moment, I decided, I'm like, I'm just going to see how it could go. And I mean, I probably in the early part of my career, I competed way too much because I thought that was the way to go far. Like just keep competing, get done with the show, ram a steroid cycle so far with so many mega dosings and just eat, doing all the dumb stuff. And just, it never really worked that way. And then in 13, I linked up with Scooby, Jason Theobald, who I think actually you've actually had on this podcast.
Right.
So Jason's a super close friend of mine, and we met 2010 Junior Nationals. We met backstage. I took fifth in welter, and he needed a Snickers bar, and I actually had a spare one. So our friendship formed over Snickers. So I'm actually going to get that for him at our anniversary when we have a dinner next time. But nonetheless, and after 13, I started really just paying attention to what Jason was doing, really learning a lot more, kind of getting into some of the functional stuff like he was kind of dabbling in, because by then you had a slew because the NPC kind of exploded, I think in the 2000s, like late 2000s, with figure came on the scene, bikini and stuff. You had started around 13, 14, 15 having people with problems, metabolic issues, gut health stuff, just things you couldn't explain. And my career has done really well since then. 2017, I got second in lightweight at junior nationals. That was the best I've ever looked. Like, it just was the moment that I look in my head. 2018 nationals was there were two shows that stand out to me. 2016, I was prepping for Mr. Knoxville, Mr. Tennessee, and I was 3 weeks out. My femur broke around my rod on my right leg on the 7th set of my squat. And I was prepping myself. I tried to get on the leg press, but I couldn't. So I just got on the step mill and I hopped with my left leg for the next 3 weeks, just 60 minutes every morning. It was awful. I hired Jason the next morning. I would send him a picture of my leg all swollen. He's like, dude, are you sure? Are you sure you can do this? I'm like, I'm fine. You just guide the diet. He's like, okay. And I ended up placing second in both my shows 3 weeks and 4 weeks later. And then in 2018, I was 10 weeks out and I hairline fractured my hip on the vertical leg press. And I actually have part of that hip bone still floating around in there. To this day, I just recently had another x-ray and like, yep, still floating right there. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. But I actually ended up finishing that. I got off stage. It was funny. I collapsed, like dropped to my knees, and people thought I was having like a diuretic attack or something. I'm like, no, my hips just broke. Like, I didn't do anything dumb. But and then last year was probably my most memorable because I did a prep completely different than any other one. And that was I just chose to do all my cardio through steps and just really try to do different things that one prep, because I didn't really, with my hip, I didn't know what I could do. And I ended up doing really well. And now I'm looking all eyes forward to next year for Masters Nationals. So hopefully I get a fair shot at it.
Now, with your bone disease, does the resistance training, because I mean, resistance training is supposed to, obviously help with, muscle mass retention and bone density and all that. So does the resistance training benefit this disease that you have and the bones, or does it actually hinder it, or is it maybe a combination of both? Touch on that if you don't mind, Jeff.
So for me, I think if you, with my bone disease is permanent osteoporosis, it's just varying levels. So I actually have a moderate case of it, meaning that if you and I jumped off the 2-story building the same way, same exact, everything was identical, I'm going to walk away with shattered legs. Like you're going to walk away with maybe something, you know what I mean? Like, and the issue with us is when we break in that spot where you tend to heal more in that spot, we heal less. So you can see like on the back of my femurs and x-rays, my bone is very thin. Still to this day, genetically, my bone is thin. What I have done is I built like a shield around the bones. After watching Ronnie Coleman, I have a little fear of what my future might look like. I'm not going to lie. Like, I've made sure to tell both my sons, like, don't feel bad for me. Like, I lived a life that, like, no doctor ever said I was ever going to walk again without AIDS, man. Like, they were all like, wheelchair, crutches, canes, get used to it. And I was like, I'm back to playing baseball because I love baseball. You don't even know what I'm capable of. But to be honest with you, it's given me a quality of life I never have. And it's more, I would say, preventative. I don't think if my parents really understood OI in this day and age, they would have let me work out, especially unsupervised. And I think that mattered for me because I was willing to test the boundaries of stuff where other people wouldn't have. And I had known that from physical therapy. Like, I knew thresholds that were uncomfortable, but not too uncomfortable. And I think that's why I accelerated in bodybuilding in that regard. Like, it just took off for me, more mental than anything.
So the resistance training, then, it doesn't necessarily hinder the bone disease that you have.
No, it doesn't hinder it at all in that regard. It's going to be there no matter what. If anything, it just gives me a quality of life that doesn't suck.
Okay. So, all right. Now, what is your long-term, we're going to kind of wrap up kind of competitive bodybuilding. Then we're going to start getting into training and coaching and
sure,
get a little bit more in depth in that direction, Jeff. But in terms of competitive bodybuilding, what's your ultimate goal when you finally say, okay, I'm done competing? I'm going to be happy if I've accomplished what?
I'll be tickled shitless, my man, if I get a pro card. I think everyone can, honest to God, say that. I don't believe that's in the cards for me because of my legs. I will always lose the symmetrical round. But I think just there'll come a point when I know that was the best I could do. And I don't think I've done it yet. So I gave myself to 45. I said, man, it'd be cool with this bone disease if I managed to do 30 years. Like I was giving my good friend Cade Zook was up here not too long ago, and I was giving him shit. I'm like, man, you're already pro and out long before I'm even pro, and I'm still going with this brittle bone disease. Like, what's up with this cripple kicking your ass? And he was like, it's crazy. I don't know, man. I just, if anything, my biggest thing I tell people is like, if I can do this, why can't you? Like, and I don't mean like necessarily go find bodybuilding, but the belief in yourself. So for me, it will just be that moment where I'm like, no, that's 100%. I know I did my best, and then I'll walk. But if I got a pro card, tickle shitless, my friend.
Yeah. Do you feel like bodybuilding gave you an identity? Maybe at a point in your life when you didn't necessarily have an identity, or maybe you were kind of searching for one, or not per se.
Oh no, bodybuilding gave me, like, I honestly believe if I didn't find bodybuilding, I would have found bad things in life. Like I really do, because I was just, bodybuilding gave me, talk about this book. It gave me a place to place my anger and my hate, my self-hatred for what I did to myself, my anger for how people treated me, for how people looked at me and picked on me. And I could do it very silently. I didn't have to say a word. Like, I could go about playing Dungeons and Dragons. My friends had no clue that I was in the gym, like thinking about like killing fucking shit, and just like, I have to prove everybody wrong. So, no, definitely on that.
Yeah. Okay. So, taking a step back, then you have your government job, and then why don't you unpack you starting to, train and coach and unfold that story for us, please? Because I'm kind of interested in how you kind of went from the government stuff and then into kind of what you've created for yourself at this point, Jeff.
So, it was 2005. I had been working at the airport here in Nashville for a year. It was very political. I'd made a round of promotions already, missed out on another round. I was working 7 days a week. My wife at the time, she had a daughter who has since passed away, but she had a rare condition, and she had to work different hours. We had her son, and I didn't want her to work anymore. So I was like, hey, this guy at the gym, he keeps bothering me to train her. And she's like, I thought you hate trainers. I'm like, oh, normally I do, but like this guy's different, because back in, like, I think you're laughing because, like, you know what I mean? Like, if you came up in the 90s, 2000s, trainers held a clipboard, they stretched women out. It was so sissy-ish. Like, they were like, they'd be on a treadmill, like, okay, run, yes, walk. And it was like, what are you doing? And anyone who worked out knew that shit didn't work. You know what I mean? So you'd just be like, oh, turned off by him. But what happened was I was getting ready for Mr. Tennessee, my workout part, or Mr. Knoxville. My workout, I was like, a year ahead. I was like, I think I'm going to do it. If I'm going to do it, I think I'm going to do it. And I don't really think about it. Then when those guys started doing it, it took me over the edge. But his name was Chiapetta. And we call him Chia Pet. And so he came to the gym one day. He was like, hey, I'm going to show up with you tomorrow. I'm like, okay. And he did. And he dropped like 40 pounds. And the training director was like, saw it go on. He's like, come on. I was like, ah. So I went and interviewed, and they were paying more money per hour than I was making for the government. And plus I got sales, and I'm like, well, this shit ain't bad. So I said, hey, I'll do like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'll just come in and I'll do like 4 to 6, because that would give me time. Because I worked at the airport. My shift was 3:30 to noon. So I'd leave the airport, get to the gym by 1, work out, pick up my stepdaughter, go home, set her up, and then go back to the gym and do 2 hours. But what hooked me, my friend, was the very first client I ever got was this woman. She came in with this piece of lingerie, and she's like, I want to wear this in 3 months. And I'm like, all right, girl, well, we'll do it. And dude, she came in like 3 months later, picked me up, and I'm not a little guy. And she's like, she's like, I get it. And just seeing her have that confidence after 10 years, like, I, as a coach, there's a lot of coaches, God bless them, like Mac Jansen, them, who get, just all competitors, right? But I think my life as a coach has been more fulfilling because I have more gym pop. Like, I've gotten to see more people do cooler things than just a competitor, who should do that anyway because they're a fucking competitor, pardon my language. But since they're a competitor, they should be able to do that.
Cool. Okay. So that was the starting point. So then unpack kind of the evolution of you getting into coaching, online coaching. Talk about Jason Theobald's, maybe influence, impact on you. not as a competitor, but maybe more as a coach. And I really, because I really want to get into more of the gut health and the health side of things. But before we get there, I want to just hear more about the evolution of your training and coaching. So from that point, helping that lady get into her lingerie, how did this story of your coaching and training unpack or unfold?
It sounds so good if you just use that sound bite right there. Like from helping this woman get in her lingerie, people like, excuse me. So from there, like I was just doing it part-time, and in 2007, man, I just got tired of working for the government. I did my 5 years. I remember walking in one day and I looked at my partner, Vince. It was just like, I'm done. He's like, no, you're not. I'm like, man, I think I am. I have a full book. I had extended more hours. I was going on less sleep. I had a wait list to get a hold of me. I said, I think I'm going to do it. And I did. And I never looked back. So that was 2007. I jumped ship right during the economic collapse. So that was exciting. Anyone who lived in 07, 08 knows exactly what I'm talking about. But Nashville seemed to be kind of immune. It seems to be kind of immune to our current quote unquote recession that we're in. No one knows if we are or aren't. But and I was doing different stuff than the other trainers. Like I was giving people programs to do on their own. I was giving them diet stuff. You know, back then it was not macros, it was just fixed meal plans, and you kind of adjusted it based upon weights and stuff like that. And then in 2008, I won Company of Trainer of the Year, and they were a brand that was eventually bought out by LA Fitness. And then in 2009, I was runner up for Quality Control Specialist, which is basically a head trainer. I had the best sales, blah, blah, blah. In 2010, I was promised more money, and they didn't do that. And then the owner of the company bragged about his $17 million boat he bought. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. So I went in, and the next day, I got back from the award ceremony that following Monday, and I was telling my clients, like, hey, you're paying 40 a session. If I do it for 20, would you leave? And they're like, sure. All 57 of my clients left because I was all in person. So that carried me through. And then it was about 2015, 16. I was working with Jason by then. I kind of seen how the offense was set up for online coaching, kind of how you do it. And I started getting people like loved ones, close friends from local people I was training who were looking for someone who didn't mind like getting exercise videos shot, that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay. I started getting into online coaching. Jason helped me a lot with that. But I really didn't enter the online coaching space until 2019 when I formed the Excellence Cartel with Jason Theobald and Jeffrey Sue of First Call Out Fitness. That's when I really threw my ring in the hat, or the hat in the ring. But over the course of, say, 2015, I opened up Iron House Strength and Conditioning. So that was the gym I now still own to this day. We've been open for over 7 years. In the course 7 years, I've also lost the business partner that I opened that gym with. He died of cancer a few years ago. 37 years old. I think he was very young. And that's pretty much been my evolution. More in-person training. I actually really enjoy the in-person side more than the online. But for online, I think it's an easy, good way to really sharpen your skills because you have to communicate to people differently through that. But I think that too many people skip out on the in-person training because they see online being like this, just, oh, I can sit at home all day. I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, it's boring. Like, get out and go talk to people. You'll enjoy yourself better. So that's kind of been my evolution, man. It's all my moves. I never sought out to be like a gym owner. In the back of my head, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But then I think you probably know, you work big boxes and you're like, well, how could I ever own a small gym and compete with this where it's got millions of dollars, And somehow I've lucked into things. I've been very, very fortunate that people I've surrounded myself with wanted to take an interest in helping me be better, but also an understanding that growth is not a linear thing. It is very much a rocket ship if you choose to make it. And it's been nice to have people push me to do that.
Okay. So something I want to touch on that you just said in terms of, being surrounded by, the right people or having a great team around you, kind of however you worded that, Jeff. Now, this is something coming from me personally, right? Like I've realized I like to do things on my own and I don't really like to be told what to do, right? But I've realized if I want to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish in life, like I need help. Like I can only go so far with myself because there's just so much going on, especially when you own a business. So talk about from your perspective, in your experience, the importance of having the right people around you? How do you find those people? And just talk about the team aspect of accomplishing goals and, having businesses and all of that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it matters above all else getting people to understand who you really are as a leader, and what you're really about. And I'm a very transparent person. Like, I'm a competitor in a true sense. Like, I believe it's okay to run the score up 100-0. Like Andy Frisell and them say, like, I'm cool with that. Like, it resonates deep in my heart. But finding what motivates people about what you want to do with what you see is the big part about transparency leadership. Like, I see a lot of people who need help. Like, I walk through a mall, I see a lot of people who could use our help. But getting people to buy into your vision, treating people really well. And I think number 3, the biggest one, which a lot of business owners will shake in their boots when I say this, but get your hands out of people's pockets. Like, you don't need these massive 50-60% cuts. And if you're a coach paying that, you should really reconsider who you're working for. I'm sure they might have funnels and so forth, but I think if you take care of people financially and you let them know you're willing to do that, like, to build a team's a lot easier when you're not the focal point of the team. Like, on Relentless Forever, my team of coaches, I'm a coach in there. I pay the same contributions my other coaches do, so we could do projects. When it comes to Iron House, I take a small salary so I can keep growing the gym and pay my staff above and beyond. Like, my general manager makes $20K more than any advertised GM position in all of Nashville for gyms. So that's how you get people to buy in and lead. If you're going to own a gym, and I think you know this, gyms don't make you money. What makes you money is the personal training. What makes you money is the supplements. What makes you money is the apparel. To own a gym is a great, like, fortress for the rest of your businesses. But I'm a big believer. I use strength finders. So one of my really good friends, JR, he works for Alliance Bernstein. They're a big financial company. This is actually used in Silicon Valley. I did a local leadership group here in Nashville. I encourage all coaches, if you quote unquote are big enough to be the CEO, as you brag about on their social media, you should be looking at taking your CEO self and getting into leadership councils in your local community. I present next week to the city of Nashville City Council on stress, and I'm going to have a room of 200 people, like, that are very influential in Nashville, just because I joined this leadership group. But they use this thing called Strength Finders. It's by Gallup. And it's the Clifton Strength Finder. So what it does is it lets you know, like, for example, my number one thing is context. I can look to the past to be able to understand the present. The next biggest one is relator. I like to build deep, meaningful relationships with people. So you work with me, I want people I build deep, meaning relationships with. I don't want people that I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants and it's going to be kind of like a one-night stand business transaction. I utilize that. And then by holding people to their strengths, not their weaknesses, that's how I built my culture. I only care if people worry about what they're strong at. I don't really care about what they're weak at. And I think if you're trying to figure out how to get teamwork involved, the best way to build teamwork is to let people know exactly who they are. And then that put them in positions to win. Like Jim Collins talks about that in Good to Great. If you're a business owner, you should read that book. You don't need a business class to understand business begins and ends with the visionary. If you can't see it, your company will die. And that is a huge thing that people's miss. But in Good to Great, he talks about the hedgehog concept, about the flywheel, about getting things, focus on your one thing, move the wheel forward. And I think that if you could focus on one thing and move the wheel forward, that's what gets your teamwork going. Because if you got people moving in 47 different directions, you're going to get 47 different interactions of a team. Teams that win move together in one step. Lockstep.
Excellent. Okay. Now the health, the more health side of coaching. Obviously Jason, is a big proponent of that. Talk about how you kind of saw maybe within the bodybuilding industry, fitness industry, some of these health issues with your own clients or whatever. Talk about the evolution, Jeff, of you kind of getting more health conscious or health focused in terms of training people, coaching people, and all of that. And then I also want you to talk about NuEthix, because I know you're tied in with that company. So just chat about that for a minute, please.
Um, I think what kind of got me into it was you were seeing, and Jason would probably say this was similar too. You'd have people that would be like, no, I promise you, I'm really doing the plan. Like, you know, here's the thing, man. You all could think people are weak, because we're competitors. We're built to be hardcore wired. You'd be surprised how many average Joes, average Jans could probably diet better than we can. Like, and won't have cheat meals or splurge. So when you get some people who are like crying, tears in their eyes, like you have to go look for answers. When things don't make sense, you go find it. And I think it was weird because Jason had met Vince Pitstick, and start working with him a little bit. And they later ended up forming NuEthix. But, Jason and I were exchanging quote unquote the woo woo books, like the functional medicine books that were like 7 days, the detox, stupid titles. But what they had in them was things that made sense, like how stress looked primarily, and kind of getting into that and being like, oh, wow, maybe that's why some of it is because when you eat those bro diets for so long, you get micronutrient deficiencies. Then if you flex too much, you can get like issues with your liver because you can jack up your insulin resistance. And then once your liver goes, so does your thyroid and everything else. So there were just things that made sense, especially the digestion stuff. Like when I would read these books about gut health, because around 2015, 16, that started coming out like this whole, oh man, like maybe the gut is the second brain and the vagus nerve is the massive highway that tells each other. Like it was groundbreaking stuff at the time. Just kind of like putting into play with clients, like not being afraid to being like, hey, I read this, here's some stuff, da 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 da. What do you think? And a lot of people, man, if they're at their wits end, they're going to try it. That's how I was with psychedelics. Once I'm at my wits end, when I was just like, I don't really give a crap if I live or die. Like that's terrible for me to look at. I have 2 kids and I could care less if I existed. You know what I mean? Horrible to feel that way. People will try stuff. And then when it started working, I'm like, holy hell. like what? Like, you know what I mean? It took me back. And I think in all honesty, where the bigger issues are, it's more in the gym pop. And I've seen that from owning a gym. I've seen that because I primarily coach a lot of gym pop. I only work with a few competitors and I usually do heavy, like an interview with them because I am a competitor who fiercely competes. I'm not going to care about your I'll field a phone call, listen to your problems. But at the end of the day, once those problems are exposed, you still have to do what you got to do to win. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, that's a whole different animal. You're teaching people how to build confidence back in themselves. And a lot of people just don't know what to eat. So therefore, they don't really understand how poisonous the food really is. Like when you get into these books, man, like there's one I'm actually presenting on the coaching consortium with a couple other coaches. I'm talking about iodine and copper in like high doses. So I played around with these. And it's crazy. But this woman, Linda Farrow, shows when iodine when bromide came on the scene in the 1970s, it blocks iodine. At the same time, breast cancer started growing. So breasts have the most receptors for iodine, and women tend to have the least amount of iodine. And you can sweat up to 150 micrograms of iodine out per hour. And what do most women like to do for their workouts? Cardio, which means sweating. So you can see why a lot of women have thyroid. And just when you start putting together those pieces, man, there's just no looking back. I think it blends beautifully with research, but I always think research is going to be behind. And call me woo woo, give me a tinfoil hat. But I think after the horrible research you saw coming on 2020 and 2021 involving certain vaccines and certain drugs, you're always going to have a healthy amount of skepticism for what you're reading going forward. And that's a sad thing, I think, about the science community. It's a damn sad thing. And I would say it to them openly. But they let it get that far where it's almost like a joke.
Yeah. What are some of those woo woo books? I love that you use that terminology because, like I told you before, I moved back to Iowa. I lived out in Colorado, and I say that's like a woo woo state, man. If you want woo woo, hang out in Colorado. But anyways, what are some of those woo woo books or some of those earlier books that you read that maybe still are very relevant today that you could maybe recommend to us? I'm even curious myself.
Oh man, the cortisol connection by Sean Talbot. Lyle McDonald's The Women's Hormone Book, Volume 1. Scott Stevenson, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach was great. The Women's Hormone Cure by Linda Gottfried. There is that book, Beyond the Pill by Dr. Jolene Brighton. It's really good. And then you have some really good stuff like the Adrenal Thyroid Revolution. And I'll be honest, I can't remember that last one. That was really, really cool. There was a whole Dopamine Nation was pretty cool. And Metabolical. Metabolic's by Lustig, and he kind of gets some flack because he's kind of like real out there. But at the same time, like what he says is like legitimately true. When you go look at people's blood works, usually the liver is the first place that's kind of off across the board. And you have to sort that out. And that's usually the root cause of their insulin resistance and other stuff. You know, once you kind of clean that up and tell people like, no, your liver can take a hit just by is not only helps you during drinking bouts when you go on UT game day, for example, it helps you with all this other stuff. So those were some of the woo-woo books I recommend. I do think as an honorable mention, Ben Greenfield's Boundless, he gets overlooked a lot, but that thing is jam-packed with stuff.
How does anabolics, PEDs kind of come into play with the health side of, obviously more specifically talking about bodybuilding, because the majority of people are going to be watching, listening to this are bodybuilding focused, they're competitors.
Sure.
And a lot of them, you know, have dabbled with PEDs or are currently on PEDs. And I just want to give them some valuable takeaways in terms of health and PEDs and just kind of that line right there.
Well, you're talking to a guy who I'm not doing a calcium score test or any of that stuff until I'm done retiring bodybuilding because I don't want to know. And so you're talking to a person that understands what I'm playing with. And I think there needs to be a little bit better of a discussion. I think John Jewett's doing a great job of that. Victor Black, some of those people who are kind of talking, because I came from the era of, and I think you came up in it, Show Us the Body Bags was John Romano, who actually did an interview with me back in 2010. When I did junior nationals. John Romano actually wrote a story about me, but he was super cool to talk to. But that was his big quote. And now you're starting to kind of see the bodies. Now it could be a few things. It could actually be that, you know, the drug use was too high. It could just be social media is more prevalent, so we're more aware. Take your pick. It could be the shot that everyone says going around. But at the end of the day, there is some risk. And I think understanding your genetics. So if I was a competitor and I was a bodybuilder and I was like, hey, I'm going to do these things, but I need to understand my health. One, make sure you get blood work at the beginning of your cycle, during your cycle. Like with my competitors, I'll be like, hey, let's get it at the midpoint, see what's actually going on in there, you know, and then check it again at the end. And that way you can kind of understand, like, do I need to get two to go to protect my liver more? You know, do I need to maybe look at, you know, putting stuff in like BPC to help mitigate some of the C-reactive protein stuff? Because BPC is amazing for helping lower inflammation, like, you know, just all throughout the body. And TB 500, I think it has those have other great applications. Protecting your digestion would be a huge one because, you know, you're taking some of that extra blunt, that extra inflammation, pushing that food. And I think just most importantly, if you hear or see someone say on social media that 300 mgs of test is a lot, that might not be for you. And what I mean by that is some people need 600, some people need 750. Some people just can get away on 200. Like, and I think that going into it and finding what's the best for you against blood work that you're willing to risk is how I would tell everybody to do that. But if you're interested in really preserving your health, there's nothing wrong with reading about how to protect your gut health, digestive enzymes, glutamine, beta, you know, apple cider vinegar pills. Those will go a long way with just helping you. And then a good hack is phosphoserine. I'm a big believer in that post-workout. It helps mitigate the cortisol-induced exercise response you get. And I think that's goes a long way for especially women to get them through the training. But I hope that kind of answers your question. I think that for me, I would never, ever change my drug use. I've learned a lot. Now, there are times I shudder when I think about what I did, sure. But I think that in this day and age, when you have genetics, you have all these different tests available. If you could spend a couple $100 on a steroid cycle, you should make sure you could at least kind of get your ferritin and some of these other things checked. And I can get behind that. But I think that to say you can do steroids safely and maintain health is kind of naive. I think you just don't know. It's like trying to say I'm going to smoke pot every day like I do, and I hope I don't get something one day because it's probably going to happen. Just luck of the draw.
Okay, we're going to start wrapping up. I do want to go back quickly, and I want you to talk a little bit about your connection with NuEthix.
Okay.
I'm currently going through a gut protocol with Austin Stout, and one of the, I guess pills, or however you want to word that, is in that protocol is from NuEthix. So I've been doing a little research on, the NuEthix website, and I know Jason's a big part of that, and his wife, and things like that. But talk about your connection to NuEthix. What is NuEthix, and what's the goal with NuEthix?
So I can't speak to what the goal for the company is, because I merely am a big proponent and supporter of Jason, Vince, and Stephanie over there. I got involved in NuEthix because Jason was venting that the guy that he wanted to work with teaching coaches how to use the supplements and talk to and help them and all that had backed out, was going to do something else. And I'm like, well, I'll do it for you. He's like, are you sure? And I'm like, sure. I can do it in a month. So what I started doing was teaching the coaches and go over the supplements. Like, hey, here's Metapure. It's a phase 1, phase 2 liver detoxifier. Here's some areas that you might want to use it in. And I would go through stuff like that, case studies, and answer their questions. What NuEthix is, it's guaranteed great quality products on the health side. I don't know if they're trying to break into sports performance yet, like, pre-workouts, all that kind of stuff. But when you use, for example, like Gut Defender or Biofilm Resolve, what those are is those are products that are going in there and just destroying the gut health, like the whole microbiome, to allow for a reset to take place. And the Biofilm Resolve, basically you can have like these like force fields, I like to say, to the bad bacteria, and the biofilm just goes in there and just makes sure they just get eaten alive. But what they are is they're supplements, rather than having to buy. When we first started doing it, the protocols we were giving were like 3 to 4 pages long, because you had to buy each ingredient. So basically what NuEthix did is they came along and said, hey, we're going to put all the ingredients together in supplements and stack them in ways that people can use. And I think they're on pace to do 6 or 7 million this year. So not bad for being in business for 5 or 6 years, but that's my affiliation with them. I help other coaches understand the products and the scenarios to basically that might be something to deploy to do. And I talked about this at the last thing we did. I did 75 hard. I did the 3 phases. If you go through the 3rd phase, you got to talk to 3 different strangers every day. Next time you get bored, I encourage anyone to do this. Start walking around a grocery store, start walking around a mall, and asking people what they think of a personal trainer. You would be stunned at how, like, literally maybe 1 person out of 100 knew exactly what I did for a living. Like, could be like, oh yeah, it's this, that. You do blood sugar, you do temperature checks, you watch your bowel movements, like really intricate understand. The other people were like, well, I mean, I guess they just isn't like an Advocare trainer or like an It Works trainer. Like, you would just hear all these crazy things, like an F45 trainer. I'm like, what the hell? Like, it's just very different. I think they've done a really good job of closing that gap, of really kind of like putting coaches in a position to win with their clients, because most people think that supplements is you take them for a little bit, you get the results you need, and then you're done. But the way our environment's becoming, supplements are going to be more of a preventative strategy rather than a reactive strategy for long-term health, I think.
Do you believe that coaches need coaches?
Yes, I do. I think you need them in all areas. Like, I have a mentor who's scaled 2 companies to over 50 million, who spends time with me when he's in town, talking to me about what I see and so forth, to Jason, who handles my nutrition, to me getting ready for prep, to Jason Coley, who works for me with Relentless, who handles my programming for me for training. So I think it's great, because if anything, you get to learn a different lens to see things through. You get to learn different ways to say things, and those are powerful ways. Like, if you're gonna train and do this for 25 years, and you want to make a shit of a living at it, or not a shit of a living, and make a great living at it, you need to figure you got to train about 30 to 50 people a month, like decently, which means over the course of 25 years, you're going to come in contact with at least 1,000 plus people. You're not going to be able to get through to 1,000 plus people if you only say things your way. You have to meet and coach and learn from other people to get better experiences. And I think that is something that everyone could use in all areas of life.
When did you get your first tattoo, Jeff?
When I was 19, and my mom cried when I came home with it. You're in your skin. And it didn't stop. So, and you know what's,
what was your first tattoo?
it was a Superman tattoo, just like Lee Priest. I had to be like Lee Priest.
I love it.
Yep. I ended up having to cover it up because the guy put it weird on my shoulder. And as I grew over time, it looked stupid. So like it's now part of my koi fish. If you look kind of hard, you can see something was there. But it's funny, as a dad to two kids, I looked at both my boys and was like, please don't get tattoos. You know, my oldest hasn't listened to me, but my youngest is like, I'm like, just wait. I promise you, just give it a little time. I wouldn't change any of them. But now I'm like, man, was that story important to me? Like now is like, you know, when you look back on it. So, yep. Good question. Never had that one.
I want to ask just a follow-up question about the tattoos, because obviously I have them and I love them. Do you feel like the tattoos kind of gave you a type of an identity as well, in terms of kind of like that hardcore masculine identity? Do you feel like that maybe tied into you continuing to get tattoos, or not per se?
No. That was because by then I had already like accomplished the, like, so I sought pain. Like that's a real thing. Like I personally sought pain from all those surgeries all the way through. So what happened was, once I did bodybuilding, I'm like, well, it's not really uncomfortable anymore. I should probably just keep getting inked. And then they started getting outrageous. Like I'm covered on my upper back, both my chest, elbows, which suck. My hands were tattooed. I have one on my neck. I fell asleep during the tattoo on the back of my calf. My artist's like, I can't believe you fell asleep during that. I'm like, it's just, you get numb to it. So for me, I don't think it, maybe at one point it might have made me feel like that, but I wouldn't say I hate to use the word identify, but I don't think that I was like, oh yeah, I'm more of a badass now because of that. I just think that that's how I was destined to look, like bearded, bald, and beautiful, if I'm just being honest.
I think the tattoos, our generation, your generation, my generation, I think the tattoo scene was a little bit different than it is today. And I
Correct.
think it was just kind of, I don't know, something that a lot of us chose to do in that generation for whatever reason, you know, but okay, we're going to wrap it up, Jeff. I know you got probably a lot ahead of you today. Kind of in closing, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Any final thoughts, any final words that you want to leave with us? Any shout outs, anything that you want to share in terms of Instagram, websites, whatever you got for us? I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll do a quick outro and that'll be a wrap. So platform's yours, Jeff.
Oh man. Well, I really appreciate you, Quentin, taking the time to interview me and even considering to bring me on. I really appreciate it. But if you guys are trying to know more about me, I'm on Instagram, Jeff Unbreakable Black. I host the Excellence Cartel, which is a coaching platform I do with Scoob and Jeffrey Sue with First Call Fitness. I also do another one with Brandon DeCruz, Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. But honestly, man, the only thing I want to leave people with is just what I said a little bit earlier. If I can do this, why can't you do what you want to do? Like, it's all about like just that, like, you know, I have Bellator Viscus Poeta Anima tattooed on my back. It means warrior heart, poet soul. And I've just always been like that, you know, just like give it your all, make it the story you want to write from deep within your soul. And I tell everybody that you only got one shot at this, man. And I'm glad that I spent the first 10 years, like 20 to 30, 22, 32, to kind of just being just a checked out, lame dude, just trying to run through life, to kind of like finding aim and finding purpose and just deciding to grow up and put forth what I did as a kid, you know, like looking at it like, hey, if I can do this, I did that as a kid. Why can't I do this as an adult? Like, in a lot of that was, you know, I think the biggest last thing I would leave everybody is show me your closest 5 people to you and I'll show you you. And if you're not who you want to be, odds are the people around you aren't the people you need them to be. And that would be the one piece of advice I'd give to anyone, whether they're looking to be a pro bodybuilder, whether you're looking to build that side hustle, whether you're looking to dominate more as a brand, a supplement owner, a gym owner like yourself, anyone, surround yourself with people who want you to win.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Dude, appreciate you, man.
Yep, for sure. All of you who are tuning in to this episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, just quickly, I would ask, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and then take this episode with Jeff, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Jeff, tag Behind the Muscle, so that we know that you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.